What on earth happened to North Carolina football? The Tar Heels were ranked number 10 in this year's preseason poll, and many expected them to be the second best team in the ACC. You could go back and forth between them and the Miami Hurricanes, but either way, the Heels had arguably the best quarterback in college football, a great head coach in Mack Brown, and a lot of promising players who were supposed to step up. Unfortunately for both the ACC and North Carolina fans, Virginia Tech put them in their place. Justin Fuente is now off the hot seat for this year, and Sam Howell may be off the Heisman list. He had a QBR of 41.1, threw 3 interceptions, and had a boneheaded play that ended the game. Outside of an actual fan, I'm one of the biggest proponents of North Carolina football you can find. I was super high on Sam Howell. I was backing up the North Carolina hype, but now the question has to be asked, was North Carolina the most overrated team going into this college football season? I think the answer is yes. And in today's video, what's going to happen next for the Heels? We're going to go over what the heck went wrong in this game for them, and overall we're just going to recap this game. But first, right before we get into it, nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed for this upcoming college football season, and I'm going to be putting out endless content, and you're not going to want to miss out. And if you want to follow along, check out my 2021 college football season link. I have it both in my description and pinned as the top comment. Before we get started, be sure to hit that like button and let me know a topic I can take a look at next. And now let's get started and talk about North Carolina football. First and foremost, congratulations to Virginia Tech, and a huge congrats to Justin Fuente. Fuente was one of the coaches on the hot seat going into this year, and many did not know if he would survive. Not only did the Hokies start the year with a win, but they beat a top 10 team for the first time in nearly 15 years, and the team actually looked pretty good. I'm going to do an entire video talking about Virginia Tech football later this afternoon, so be sure to stay tuned for that one. But for now, let's go talk about North Carolina. In order to talk about how this game went, we need to first go back in time and examine some of the hype leading up to this event. Going back nearly a decade, Butch Davis put some scandal into this program, and they would need a coach to rebuild. They hired an offensive genius in Larry Fedora from Southern Miss, and he immediately came in and turned the program around. He had a great first year, but because of Butch Davis, they were not allowed to go to a bowl game. Flash forward to 2015, they did lose their first game of the year to South Carolina, but they reeled off 11 straight wins, found themselves top 10, and if they would just beat Clemson in the ACC title game, they could potentially be a college football playoff team. They kept that game close, and there was a terrible call on an onside kick, and they did not get the ball back, and the Clemson Tigers ended up winning. From there, Fedora started to lose recruiting momentum, the team didn't play as well, and he started saying some stuff off the field that got him fired. So now the Heels had to look in a new direction. They hired a legendary coach who really got his first start there in Mack Brown. He decided to come out of retirement to have one last coaching hoorah, and immediately, the Heels started to have a lot of hype. But first, he needed a quarterback. Cade Fortin and Jace Ruder were not going to get the job done, so he went out and flipped a 4-star quarterback. His name was Sam Howell, and he was from in-state, but he was already committed to the Florida State Seminoles. Thankfully for him, Mack Brown changed the game in the recruitment. He could offer him early playing time, and the coach that Howell loved at Florida State, Walt Bell, left to take the head coaching job at UMass. The writing was on the wall, and Sam Howell flipped to North Carolina. He won the starting job and immediately had a great freshman year. He had one of the best freshman seasons for a quarterback in college football history. He seemed like he had that it factor, and he almost led them to a win over Clemson, and as you guys remember, they lost off a failed 2-point conversion. North Carolina ended up going 6-6 in the regular season, but there was a lot of hype to this team going into 2020. They began the year ranked, and while they weren't perfect, they only lost 3 games, and Sam Howell established himself as once again one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. He had an extremely great year, and going into 2021, not only was he considered a Heisman contender, but North Carolina was going to be back, and he could be the number 1 overall pick if he played his cards right. But it wasn't going to be that easy, as North Carolina lost a lot on that offensive side of the ball. When you look at the wide receiver spots, they lost both Dyami Brown and Daz Newsome, and while Newsome was cut from the Bears, Dyami Brown looks like he's going to be an impact player for the Washington football team. So right there, you take away his 2 best passing weapons, but you can also not forget the 2-headed monster they had in the backfield. Michael Carter and Javonte Williams were both tremendous players, and that's why they're both drafted on day 2. Michael Carter will be the running back for the Jets, and Javonte Williams is looking to take over as the next running back for the Broncos. And right there, you had your 4 best players gone. Even with those 4 guys, they still lost 3 games last year. And many were wondering, is North Carolina the most overrated team in the country? They had Mack Brown, they had Sam Howell, they had some young pieces, and they had a good defense. Most people said not to worry about it, and that North Carolina could be a 10-11 win team, and if they played their cards right, they would be going to the college football playoff, and at least the ACC championship. Well, they at least started out hyped up, as the voters determined they were the 10th best team going into this preseason, and a lot of people say preseason rankings are worthless, and I know Tar Heel fans wish that could happen right now. If you were like me, I had this game on yesterday, and immediately I knew this was going to be a tough game for North Carolina, as when Virginia Tech's Lane Stadium was sold out, they were rocking when Enter Sandman came on, and the team just seemed super hyped. I knew this was going to be a very difficult environment for them to win in. In that first quarter, Virginia Tech ended up scoring on their first drive as their quarterback Braxton Burmeister took a play 4 yards into the end zone to put 6 points on the board. If you don't know who Braxton Burmeister was, he was a 4-star recruit coming out of the state of California and originally took his talents to Oregon. He was supposed to be their next great quarterback, but obviously Justin Herbert beat him out, and then Braxton Burmeister decided to go across the country and transfer to Virginia Tech, where he has played a little bit over the last few years, but now he's established himself as the starter. In the second quarter, Burmeister had another touchdown to James Mitchell, and by the time halftime was rolling around, it was 14-0 the Hokies. The first few drives were very inconsistent, as Howell would complete a few passes, but there'd be a sack, a penalty, or an incompletion, and their drive would end up being cut short. They did not look very good, the offensive line didn't seem to be giving him a lot of time, and those young and inexperienced wide receivers were just not getting open. I want to revisit that offensive line, as they returned all 5 starters, and all of them were upperclassmen, and many were talking about how they could potentially have the best line in the conference, and how they were going to protect Sam Howell, and it was going to be a strength of the team. Things were terrible. It did not go well. They could not protect Sam Howell, and they gave up so many sacks. This was a huge problem for North Carolina, as they could not establish a lot of offensive consistency. Going into the third quarter, many thought they would come out with a scripted plan and at least put some points on the board, but that first drive was a 3-and-out. After their defense held, they got another opportunity, but Sam Howell threw an interception. Then they would get another 3-and-out, and finally they'd put it together, as their superstar wide receiver in the making would emerge. Josh Downs was a top 100 wide receiver in the class of 2020, and he showed out in their bowl game last year, and many expected that he's going to be the next great Tar Heel wideout. I 100% agree with that, as I put him in a video about my breakout players, and Josh Downs had a 37-yard touchdown. Some could argue it was more of a running play, as it was more of a screen, but either way, Downs put points on the board. So yeah, Downs got them back into the game, but the defense would have to come through and get them another stop, and maybe they could just squeak by. The Hokies ended up going down the field, and they made a field goal. Howell would end up leading them down the field, but when it came to 4th and 3, Sam Howell's target Emery Simmons dropped a slant, and the defense would have to hold again. Thankfully, they would get bailed out, as on the very next play, Jaquarius Conley ended up picking the ball off of the heels, and they had good field position. Unfortunately, this would be short-lived, as 2 plays later, Sam Howell's ball would get deflected and picked off by the Hokies. Virginia Tech was now up 7 points in field goal range, but North Carolina got lucky and they missed it. He ended up hooking the field goal, and North Carolina was now down 10 points. They drove down the field and ended up taking 3 points, and now they would need one more stop. They forced a punt, and now Sam Howell's Heisman hopes were on the line, as he would need to lead them down the field to try and save the game. At first, it was looking pretty solid. But then on 2nd down and 7, when they had 3 timeouts, Howell ended up scrambling around, and right as he was about to take a sack, he either tried to throw the ball away or force it to one of the wide receivers, and it was picked up by Shamari Connor, and after review, the call was upheld, and Virginia Tech won the football game. This play will go down in history for Virginia Tech fans for a good reason, and that play will haunt North Carolina fans. It was a boneheaded decision by Sam Howell, as it wasn't 4th down, and they had 3 timeouts, and there was no reason to force it. He could have taken a sack, they could have taken a timeout and regrouped, but instead he threw the game, his Heisman campaign, and potentially the season away in one play. It was an abysmal performance by Howell tonight, and while one of the picks I do not blame on him, he still made 2 errors. He went 17 of 32 for 208 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 picks with a QBR of 41.1. The running game was not that good, as Tennessee transfer Ty Chandler only had 10 carries for 66 yards, and then DJ Jones had 6 carries for 43 yards. They were not able to get in the end zone with that, and I would like to see more out of them. The receivers are where things are very concerning. Outside of their young superstar Josh Downs, it wasn't very great. Downs had 8 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown, and definitely held his end of the bargain, but outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot going on. Emery Simmons played alright, but we're going to need to see a lot more out of this receiving game. The offensive line was obviously abysmal, the running game did not play very well, only one wide receiver stepped up, and Sam Howell did not make a lot of good decisions. I am actually pretty happy with the defense, as they only surrendered 17 points, and time again, they got stops when they needed to. In terms of the question, is North Carolina the most overrated team in college football? I think the answer is unfortunately yes. I absolutely love the Tar Heels, and I don't mean to get some hate from Tar Heel fans, but having them at number 10 maybe was a little bit of a reach. You obviously lost 4 of your 5 best offensive players, and that is a lot to replace. Should they have been top 25? Of course. Could they have developed into a top 10 team? Yes. But having them at number 10 was a stretch, and even I will admit that. Is Sam Howell overrated? That's a question that cannot be answered because he just had one bad game. He's had 2 years of good games to his name, so to call him overrated and a bad quarterback after one bad performance would be unfair to him. As we look forward to the rest of the year, I'm trying to examine how I think North Carolina will end up doing. I now have them at that 8 or 9 win mark instead of the 10 or 11 mark. As now, I would say they're going to lose to Miami and Notre Dame, and then either drop a game on the road to Pitt, home against NC State, or maybe home against Virginia. This gave North Carolina football a reality check, as it showed that they are not there yet. They have a lot to figure out, and time again, some of these overhyped ranked teams get humbled week 1. Texas is always a good example of this, and it's ironic that Mack Brown was there for a little while. I am not trying to hate on North Carolina football, as I've said. I'm a huge fan of this Tar Heels team. I really want them to succeed, and I was super high on them going into this year. But yeah, there are some question marks. I am pretty concerned, and honestly, they probably were the most overrated team going into this year. They can still save the season though, as theoretically they could go 11-1, and if they beat Clemson in the ACC title game, they're going to be in the playoff. While it doesn't look good, all hope is not lost yet. And Sam Howell could have a story for the ages if he overcomes that first loss and ends up winning the Heisman and putting up ridiculous numbers. But yeah, what do you guys think? Who was the most overrated team in college football? What were your thoughts on last night's game? And how do you think North Carolina will do for the remainder of the year? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section. Support today's video by hitting that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my 2021 playlist with all my videos and storylines from this year, and my video about Mack Brown building up North Carolina football. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.